Hey, North Harbor. It is time for our weekly Sunday broadcast from the barn. Bible from the barn is what we'll call this. This is one of my favorite places to be. And so this is where we'll do our Sunday morning videos from and our midweek videos. Um, we are. Oh, by the way, just something fun. We're gonna, for all, especially all you Patriots fans out there, we're gonna leave a little Easter egg every single week. A little New York Giants Easter egg every single week, somewhere around here that you have to find. Now, I switched it from last week. I started last week, but I didn't give you an update. So you got to go back to last week's video and try to find it. This one will be easy. All right. Okay. So from here on out, you look for that New York Giants Easter egg somewhere in the barn. All right, we're in week 4 of Lent, fourth Sunday of Lent, and we're doing a series on social justice, and we're going to continue that series, but we're going to switch it up just a little bit, just to help fit or help connect it to our present situation with the COVID-19 virus that's going around. I know everyone's sitting at home and just doing the best we can, so we're going to try to connect this just a little bit, but we are still in the same series. And this one is titled, week number 4 is A God Who Sees. One thing I realized not too long ago is it was this insight, and I think Lisa put me onto it, so I can't take credit for it, but it was this idea that if when people feel unseen, when they feel like no one sees them and no one gets their situation, then then all that they see is their own circumstances. So someone that's having a rough time, all they see is themselves and their situations, and it's hard to see beyond that. And it's really helpful for to know that a God sees us or other people see us. And when we feel like we're isolated and we're on our own, we feel unseen. And I think that comes into play very much with issues of social justice. When we feel disadvantaged, when we feel like life is throwing us a curveball, when things are down, when the chips are down, we feel unseen. And we can see our situation and all the suffering very clearly, but it's hard because we feel like no one else sees. But all I'm here to tell you that God sees, God sees, God sees you, God hears you, God perceives what is going on, not only in big social justice issues that the church can engage socially, but also in this time where we are feeling a bit more isolated anyway, at home and with social distancing. So here's the one point I want you to know and to think about this coming week. If we can't see each other's story, we will not suffer with one another. We will not show compassion with one another. If we don't see each other's story, we will not suffer with each other, and we will not pour ourselves out to help each other. Now, that suffering with and that pouring out are the two main points that we've been trying to drive home every single week, that when it comes to justice and treating people well, we need to see their suffering, we need to suffer with them, and we need to pour ourselves out. But if we can't see each other's story, we will not suffer with one another, and we will not pour ourselves out with one another. So when it comes to social justice, one of the issues I thought about that has come up in the last few years is when the Black Lives Matter and then all the others, the Blue Lives Matter and all this. So there's this issue where African Americans are feeling targeted, that the social justice system is maybe they feel like it's working against them, that they situations are unfair. And with some of the violence and the people that have been shot, sometimes unjustly, there rose the Black Lives Matter movement. And in response to that, there was people on the side of our police officers and all that saying Blue Lives Matter. And so what happens is you get into the situation where people feel disadvantaged. They feel like they're not being seen. Our police officers are worried about their safety going out to dangerous neighborhoods. Our minorities are feeling unsafe and that the system is stacked against them and they're unjust. And what happens is these movements start going, they start gaining some momentum, and then it becomes all about Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, other lives matter, whatever it is. But what's true is that every life matters, and what we're going to see this morning is how Jesus sees people on both sides of the issue. So this is very applicable now, I think, with this coronavirus pandemic and people isolating themselves, social isolation, and we can feel unseen. I hope that this also, as well as social justice issues, it helps us feel like God sees us. And so, if you remember, we looked at Isaiah 58. And just remember, if we can't see each other's story, we will not suffer with them or pour ourselves out for them. And in Isaiah 58, we had read a few weeks ago from this passage where Isaiah is speaking out against the religious leaders and the religious institution there, Israel, long before the time of Jesus. He says, this is the kind of fasting or worship that I want. This is Isaiah 58, 6-9. This is the kind of worship that I want, fasting that I want. Free those who are wrongly imprisoned. Lighten the burden of those who work for you. Let the oppressed go free. And remove the chains that bind people. Share your food with the hungry and give shelter to the homeless. Give clothes to those who need them. Do not hide from relatives who need your help. Then your salvation will come like the dawn. Your wounds will quickly heal. Your godliness will lead you forward. And the glory of the Lord protect you from behind. Then you will call and the Lord will answer. Yes, I am here. He will quickly reply. And so one of the things we talked about in that first sermon, week number 1 of this series, is that Israel had lost kind of their memory of their story. That part of their story was being delivered as slaves, that God looks after them, delivers them from oppression, feeds them, gives them a home, and sets them up for success in the land that we now call Israel. And this is part of the story. This is really interesting. Listen to this. This is Exodus 1, 6-11. At the end of Genesis, the Israelites are living in Egypt, and they are part of society. But the leadership comes and goes in Egypt, and then years later, you have a Pharaoh who doesn't really understand what these people are doing there. It says in Exodus 1, verse 6, in time, Joseph and all his brothers died. These are all the first Jews that went into Egypt, ending that entire generation. So these are the first Jews that went into Egypt, had favor with the leadership. But their descendants, the Israelites, had many children and grandchildren. In fact, they multiplied so greatly that they became extremely powerful and filled the land. Eventually, a new king came into power in Egypt who knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done. He said to his people, look, the people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are. We must make a plan to keep them from growing even more. If we don't, and if war breaks out, they will join our enemies and fight against us. Then they will escape from the country. So the Egyptians made the Israelites their slaves. They appointed brutal slave drivers over them, hoping to wear them down with crushing labor. They forced them to build the cities of Pithom and Ramses as supply centers for the king. Now, if you listen to what's going on there, what it's saying is that the new king doesn't see the Israelites, doesn't know the story, doesn't see their story, doesn't hear about their story, doesn't perceive their situation. And so it becomes an us versus them. It's the Egyptian lives matter versus the Israelites' lives matter, and so there becomes this dividing line where we're only thinking about ourselves and we're not seeing the story of the other person. And part of Israel's deliverance and part of their story that the generation in Isaiah had forgotten was this part. God heard their groaning. Exodus 2, chapter 2, verse 24. God heard the Israelites groaning, and he remembered his covenant promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then he begins a plan to liberate them from the land of Egypt, using Moses and the plagues and the Ten Commandments. All that story unfolds after this. But I love it because it says God heard their groaning. God saw them, and he remembered his promise. He remembered what he said he was going to do, and he jumps in and delivers them. So that's part of Israelite story. And what we see in Isaiah 58 is they have come to a point where they're worshiping in their land, and they don't even see their own workers and how that they are treating them unjustly. They don't see them. If we can't see each other's story, we will not suffer with the other person, or we will not pour ourselves out for them. We will not act justly toward them. So one of the passages I wanted to look at is out of Matthew chapter 9, and this is the calling of Matthew. This is Matthew 9, 9 to 13. What Jesus does here is so interesting, and it's going to rub both groups the wrong way, and that's just the way Jesus is. It's amazing what he does, the wisdom. And so we have here the calling of one of his. Now, Matthew's one of the 12 disciples. Okay, this is one of the 12 that followed Jesus. And here we have the story of his calling. And it's very interesting. It says in Matthew 9, verse 9, as Jesus was walking along, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at his tax collector's booth. Follow me and be my disciple, Jesus said to him. So Matthew got up and followed him. So verse 9 looks really simple, but there's a lot going on here. Matthew is sitting at a tax collector's booth. So first of all, Matthew is Jewish. He's Jewish. And if he's a tax collector, then what he is doing is he is collecting taxes for the Roman Empire. And he's probably mostly collecting taxes from his Jewish neighbors, maybe family, I don't know. It's a very corrupt system because Rome doesn't really care. They're not going to check him on how much he's collecting. They just want their share. And so he could collect more. He can collect exactly what the Romans want. He could collect more. It's a very corrupt system, but he is collecting taxes, and a lot of that is coming from fellow Jews. So just imagine that you're Jewish. You are being occupied by the Roman Empire, and your neighbor, who's also Jewish, is collecting taxes from you. Now, he's set up at a booth, and it's interesting because they would set up these booths at major roadways, at crossings over streams and rivers, at major points where people are traveling. They set up a booth, and they say, you owe us a tax before you cross this area. And so Matthew is a tax collector, and he's much hated by his neighbors and by the Jews who just fed up with Roman oppression and fed up with being bled dry financially by the Roman Empire. And you have someone who's also Jewish, instead of jumping on the bandwagon to fight Rome, they're collecting taxes. He is not looked highly upon. Jesus walks up to him and says, be my disciple. Follow me. And a lot of us, I guess, if we're religious, whatever, say, yeah, let's do that. Let's switch things up here. But then Jesus goes on. This is interesting. Later, Matthew invited Jesus and his disciples, so all of Jesus' disciples already, to his home as dinner guests, along with many tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. But when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with such scum and villainy, right? A little Star Wars reference there. Scum and villainy. So later, Jesus and Matthew invites him over to eat. The Jews had all these dietary laws, and it was designed really to keep them separated from people who believed differently. And so in that culture, to sit down and eat with someone, to be invited to their home, to sit down, shows a sense of intimacy. It shows a sense of acceptance. I'm good, you're good, we're okay, we're going to sit down and have this meal. So the fact that Jesus goes there, his actions speak incredibly loud to the surrounding community. That he would sit down with his disciples, and he's gaining momentum and he's in popularity in his teaching. He goes and sits and eats at Matthew's table. This is unbelievable. And you see it happen with religious people, the religious Jewish people, the Pharisees. It says when the Pharisees saw this, you have this reference to seeing if we don't see each other's story, we're not going to suffer with them. When the Pharisees saw Jesus do this, they did do this, go to eat dinner. They asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with such scum? So the religious leaders, they don't see Matthew. They see someone collecting taxes. They see someone on the other side of the issue. They don't see a person. They see an institution that is corrupt. They see an institution that is bleeding them dry financially. They see a pagan institution that worships false gods and idolatry, all this sort of thing. They do not like Matthew because he's siding with the enemy, right? Why does your teacher eat with such scum? They don't see Matthew, and apparently they don't see Jesus either. If we can't see each other's story, we will not suffer with them. So they are distancing themselves. They see Matthew and his kind as people to stay away from. They're going to social distance, right? from Matthew, but for the wrong reasons. When Jesus heard this, verse 12, he said, healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do. Then he added, now go and learn the meaning of the scripture. I want you to show mercy, not sacrifices. I want you to show mercy, not sacrifices. This sounds a lot. It's not from Isaiah, but it sounds a lot like Isaiah. Your worship is no good to me because you don't see the suffering that you're causing on other people. So just stop doing the fasting. Stop doing the worship. What I want is justice. What I want is for you to see the other person's story. He goes on and says, for I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners. And you get a hint here that Jesus can see Matthew. There's almost a sense in here where he senses that Matthew knows. He knows that he's causing suffering. This is very much like the story of Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus, after he has dinner with Jesus, just goes out and gives back to the poor. It's amazing, the transformation that you see with Zacchaeus. And Matthew becomes one of the 12 apostles. This is incredibly important. And so Jesus sees Matthew and he draws near. And we need to wrap our minds around the fact that Jesus, a Jew, eats with tax collectors, okay? I mean, this is mind-blowing that he would even sit down with the enemy. But it's not an issue. It's a person, and he needs to see that person. Jesus sees that person and sits down with them. This is the enemy. This is one of our own who have turned against us. And not only that, but he invites him to be a disciple. Now, what's really mind-blowing here, okay, is that Jesus isn't, does he not care about the Jewish people? Is that it? I mean, he's going to be the Jewish king, the Messiah. He's going to be resurrected. He is the king. Does he not care about the Jewish people? No, he cares. That's what's incredible about this, is that he's able to see everyone. And that it's not a Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter issue. It's not an issue that divides people. I think that Jesus could look into the social injustice system, the minorities, and how there's injustice there. And he can look at people who go into situations trying to keep the law and are put themselves in danger. He can see both. And the church should be able to see both and see the suffering and enter into their story. Now, this is what Jesus does later on, not in this passage. Check this out. Jesus also invites Simon, the zealot, to be one of the 12 disciples. Now, a zealot is someone, it's a group in Jesus' day, they're Jewish, and they believe that they should fight for their freedom. Like, hey, there might be some good, some decent theology behind that. If God is truly God and God really cares about us, then why wouldn't we just fight him? I mean, look at David and Goliath. David steps out in faith, fights the enemy, the giant, and he wins. This is the idea behind the zealot movement, is let's fight. If God's on our side, let's fight. Jesus invites Simon the zealot in among his 12. So just imagine them all after dinner sitting around the campfire, and you've got Matthew, the Jewish tax collector for the Roman Empire, and Simon, the zealot, the Jewish zealot who wants to fight for freedom, use violence to gain freedom, at the same dinner table. This is amazing. Jesus sits right in the middle of this situation and sees both of them and talks with both of them and invites both of them to a new way, which is following Jesus. And I think that part of speaking to both is that, the road of seeing each other's story, of self-sacrifice, serves everyone. The road of seeing each other's story, pouring out ourselves for one another, serves everybody on both sides of that issue, of this issue. Jesus doesn't fight. He does not go along with Simon the Zealot's ideas about revolution. Nor does Jesus give in to the Roman Empire. He does not claim his innocence. It's a bogus trial. I mean, the whole trial that he goes through is unjust, but he doesn't fight it. He's not going up against Rome. He's going up against human sinfulness, and human sinfulness looks at ourselves first. And sometimes that organizes itself into big movements. And some of these movements have good points. We need to look at the injustices on both sides of those issues. But we look at each other's story. We look at the story of those on that side of the issue. We look at the story of those on this side of the issue. We cannot lose sight of the fact that this is about people, not about issues. If we can't see each other's story, we will not suffer with them or pour ourselves out for them. I saw this a little bit, on March 3rd when we had that vote with the the debate about vaccine and mandated vaccines. We saw people coming out of the woodwork, and a lot of what I saw was people defending their own story, but not talking about the other person's story, and the other person's fears, and the other person's what they're scared of, what they're concerned about. It's so easy to do that. We get in this protection mode. Jesus does not. He goes to the cross for us. He sees our story, and he pours himself out for us, just like that song we talked about a couple weeks ago, Philippians chapter 2. So here's your homework this week, all right? First of all, I want you to read the entire chapter of Matthew 9. Matthew chapter 9, read the whole thing. Take note of how often Jesus sees or hears or perceives a person, their fears, their actions, whatever it is. Take note of how often that happens. It shows up everywhere. I had a hard time narrowing down this passage because it shows up everywhere. So as a whole, this might be fun with the kids. Read it together as a family, and everyone take note. When it happens, someone raise their hand, yell out, "There it is!" Read the entire chapter and see where Jesus takes note of the other person's story, the other person's actions, the other person's feelings. Okay, and then I want you to answer these questions, or you can discuss them. These are things for prayer, issues for prayer, or discussion. Jesus sees you now. In this situation, in the social distancing now, maybe it's disrupting your life in ways you couldn't imagine. I don't know. But Jesus sees you now. Here's a question. What is he seeing? Is it positive? Or this could be positive or negative. Jesus sees joy. Jesus sees hope. Jesus sees suffering. Whatever it is, whatever you're going through, Jesus sees it. List it out. List it out what he sees. And bring this to him in prayer and discuss it with others. Discuss it with your family. Now, with Jesus' eyes, what do you see? With Jesus' perspective, what do you see in your family? What do you see in your neighborhood? What do you see in your church community? What do you see in the community at large? Brunswick, Topsom, Richmond, Bodenham. What do you see happening there? Discuss it. Ask your kids about it. Ask whoever's with you this morning about it. Bring it to God in prayer. Discuss it. See what you see. What are you noticing with people's stories? And then finally, when it comes to social justice, often these divide us, into groups, and they're based on issues. Pray over a difficult emotional issue that can divide you from others. Pray over a difficult emotional issue that can divide you from others. A lot of times this is politics. This might be immigrants and citizens and being concerned about the tax burden of illegal immigrants. It might be Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter. It might be any, the abortion issue. Pro-life, pro-choice, all of those. Pray over a difficult emotional issue that can divide you from other people, and then prayerfully ask God to help you see the other person's side of the issue, to see the people behind the issue. That's your homework for this week. Couple things, quick things. First of all, there's weekly updates that will be coming out from the barn on Wednesdays, I think. So keep an eye out for those. Those will come out in the Harbor Happenings. We're just getting going this week, and hopefully we'll get into a regular routine next week. And so keep an eye out for the Harbor Happenings emails and the weekly updates. And so that is our homework and our lesson for this morning. Let me pray very quickly. God, help us to see each other's story. Help us to know that you see our story, that you are there to pour yourself out for us. May we be empowered by your Spirit to pour ourselves out for others in this great time of need that we are living in. We thank you, God, for all that you give us. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, another video update on Wednesday, another sermon next Sunday, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.